Hey, what's up? This is Harry Wagner from Harry's Situations, and today I want to talk to you about automatic and manual transmissions. Now you might be wondering why we're even talking about manual transmissions, and I've heard all the jokes about millennial theft devices, but if you're an off-roader, you're in luck, because you can still get a Jeep Wrangler, a Jeep Gladiator, a Toyota Tacoma, or a Ford Bronco with a manual transmission, and these are the most popular off-road models. If you're wondering where I fall on the spectrum of automatic versus manual debates, I will let you know that I have owned 32 vehicles to this point in my life. 20 of them have had manual transmissions, including the first 8 vehicles that I owned. So it's no secret to say that I am a fan of manual transmissions. A lot of folks say you can't go off-road with a manual transmission or you can't rock crawl with a manual transmission. They're not good for that. That has not been my experience. And I think if you ask anyone who's owned an old Toyota pickup that probably has dual cases and a 22RE that makes 100 horsepower, they work great for technical terrain. But the key is you have to gear them down low so they don't stall all the time. You're not slipping the clutch and burning the clutch. So behind me, you'll notice there are 2 Jeeps. Both of them are on Nitto tires. My orange LJ has 37-inch Nitto trail grapplers. My friend Jason Roche was nice enough to lend us his Jeep with 40-inch Nitto trail grapplers. And regardless of what transmission you're running, your tires are what connect you to the terrain. You'll notice I keep mentioning tires and Nitto. This video is actually brought to you by Nitto Tires. If you like what we're doing here, please like this video and subscribe to the Driving Line channel. So let's walk things back just a little bit. I mentioned these 2 Jeeps here behind me. I'm not shooting this in my kitchen with a selfie stick. We're actually gonna take these out on the trail and make some impressions in the rocks. So my Jeep has a supercharged 4-liter engine. It's got a 42 RLE 4-speed automatic and a Rubicon transfer case, an MP241 Rocktrack 4-to-1. See how it lurches forward? Not great. Now Jason's Jeep, if you want all the specs on this, the Dynatrac axles, the Gen-Right suspension, everything Dr. Smash did to it, we made an entire video about this Jeep that is on the Driving Line channel. But at that time, it had a 4-liter engine and an AX15 transmission that it came with from the factory. It has since been upgraded and now has a Hesco stroker engine in it, backed by a Tremec TR4050 5-speed manual transmission. One thing to know when you're wheeling with a manual transmission, if you have the appropriate gearing, it'll really hold you back when you're going downhill and stuff. I see the influencers on Instagram, and they're putting the clutch in and they're putting the clutch out and they're stabbing the brakes, and really as smooth as you can be is just take your feet off all the pedals, put it in low gear and let it do its thing. You don't, even if you're going down something steep, it's going to keep you moving, but it's not going to be jarring, and take your foot off the clutch. Now that switch in transmission and engine are not a mistake. I think the combination is important to note because this transmission has a lower first gear, great for rock crawling and technical terrain, but being still a 5-speed like the AX15, that means your gear splits get larger. In my experience, the larger the gear splits, the more power and the wider power band you need in order to run up through the RPM, shift, still have enough power once you've shifted, and run up through the RPM again. So with the stroker engine, that isn't an issue. This thing goes down the road great. I drove it to the trail this morning and I want a stroker engine for my own Jeep now, not to mention a manual transmission. Let's say for argument's sake you do stall and you're on a technical obstacle like this. So with a manual tranny, I don't even have to put in the clutch. What I can do is I can just use the starter. It'll creep forward and keep me going. Doesn't roll back at all, nice and smooth. Now in this Jeep, there's no interlock, so it'll start with the clutch out. Toyotas have a little switch on the dash like a Tacoma. If you have a manual tranny, it's got a switch that'll allow you to override that so you can start it in gear. Pretty handy. So we're in Jason's Jeep here. One of the things that he has that I really like for a manual transmission, you got 3 pedals, you only have 2 feet. So if you're on a steep incline, you have the clutch in with 1 foot and your foot on the brake with the other foot. You can't actually give it any gas to let the clutch out and climb up the obstacle or the hill. So what he's got is a modified bicycle shifter on his shift lever here, and that operates like a hand throttle. So that's really handy when you're in a situation where you need 3 feet. Now your hand can be your 3rd foot. Gearing is perhaps the most important factor in the rocks, regardless of whether you have an automatic or a manual transmission. Now with a manual transmission, you really need that low gearing so you're not slipping the clutch, burning it up, lurching forward. But with an automatic, it's important too. It's not as obvious, but if you're not geared low enough, you can generate a ton of heat in the transmission, and that can really be hard on parts. One of the cool things that they make for this 42RLE is a Rubicrawler. So Advanced Adapters makes a planetary gear set that replaces the tail housing. It goes between the tranny and the transfer case, and it doesn't add any length or move the transfer case, and then you get 2.721 gearing in addition to your transfer case, which is pretty cool. But I don't really feel like this needs way more gearing. I would rather have that in a manual, but swap out the tranny and you can't get the Rubicrawler anymore. For the 2 Jeeps we have behind me here, both have 538 gears in the differentials. This has a 4-to-1 transfer case, while Jason's Jeep has a 4.3-to-1 Atlas, so pretty similar, but really the difference is the first gear. His Tremec manual has a 6.16-to-1 first gear, where this Jeep it's 2.8 for the automatic. So the gearing is twice as low in the manual, and you really need that because you have the direct coupling with the clutch. You don't have a torque converter that sort of provides that coupling. Now that torque converter can be handy too, because when you get bound up with a manual transmission, something has to give. It might be an axle shaft, it might be a U-joint on your driveline, but it is all connected. With an automatic, typically it'll just sort of drive through the torque converter, you'll stop, you won't continue forward motion, which can be a good thing or a bad thing. See how it kind of takes a minute for the tranny to engage? I don't love that. You know, they call automatic slush boxes for reasons like that. One of the things with an automatic I find helpful is left foot braking. So you actually put your foot on the brake and drag it. You can bring up the RPM to sort of get the vehicle moving, but without lurching forward. That builds a lot of heat though too. My eyes were really open the first time I ever drove a competition rock buggy. It had a V8 engine, it was bad to the bone, tube chassis, but it had a torque converter that was pretty loose, and as a result, you had to left foot brake. And in technical terrain, I got the transmission super hot. I actually preferred my Toyota pickup with dual cases to the rock buggy in that situation. Similarly with Ultra 4 cars, almost all of them have automatics. Spec trophy trucks all come with turbo 400s. Traditionally, trophy trucks had turbo 400s in them too. You see a lot of people running Mason all-wheel drive trucks now that have manual transmissions, so the tide is sort of turning there. While we've mainly focused on rock crawling, I do want to talk about going fast off-road as well. In those situations, automatics tend to rule the roost. And the reason being, if you're shock loading the drivetrain going through whoops, or you're jumping your vehicle, that cushion from the torque converter is really helpful. Now most vehicles that are going fast off-road also have a lot of horsepower, which helps in my experience, because an automatic robs some horsepower. So if you have a low power vehicle, like a Toyota pickup, my old Chevy Tracker, it had a manual in it because it only had a little 4-cylinder, and I want to get all that power to the ground. But if you've got power to spare, an automatic can be pretty useful for going fast. In soft terrain, like sand, snow, or mud, it takes longer to shift a manual than it does with an automatic, and that time it takes you to shift when you're in all that resistance from that terrain, you might scrub off your momentum, so an automatic can be really helpful there. Just don't fill it up with water because they won't work anymore. There are some exceptions for going fast off-road where manuals are gaining popularity. One of them is the new Can-Am Maverick R, which comes with a manual transmission that's proven to be reliable and super fast. Just because you're going fast, don't rule out a manual, but they are much less common than they are in the rocks. I am in first gear, low range, and I don't have my feet on any of the pedals. And you can see it's not stalling, it just creeps along, nice and controlled. I find that low gearing also helps you save your sheet metal, helps you save the drivetrain, because you're not hopping and bouncing, you're not throttling up things, and then the tires are spinning, they catch and they shock load parts. In that regard, it's easier on things. When you're more controlled, you're not bumping where you slide over and now you blow out a window or smash things. So this is about as good as it gets right here. Here at Harry Situations, we mostly focus on going off-road, but I did want to touch on pavement just a little bit with regards to towing. Most of us have tow rigs. Myself, I have a Ram diesel. It's got a 68 RFE automatic in it. It's worked really well for me, but I am a little scared about breaking them. They are not the strongest transmission in the world. These days, you can't get a diesel truck that comes with a manual transmission, unfortunately. But my wife has a 2007 Ram. It's got a 6-speed manual behind the diesel in it. My dad used to have an 02 Ram with an NV 5600 6-speed manual. And for towing, they get great mileage, they don't get hot, they go down the road really well, they're super reliable. But if you're driving it around town, I find them to be kind of cumbersome, to be quite honest. All manual transmissions are not created equal. You've got 6-speed manuals that maybe come in a car, super short shifting, close ratio gears. Those are good for on-road. Off-road, you typically want something with a low first gear. Drivetrain length comes into consideration here. Typically manuals are much more compact than an automatic. The entire drivetrain in my flat fender, the transmission and the transfer case and the overdrive are 27 inches long. A Turbo 400 alone without a transfer case or an overdrive is 24 inches long. So that's never gonna fit in a flat fender. You basically need to run a manual. Even beyond packaging, manuals vary quite a bit. My Ford truck came with an MP435. These have a great reputation, and it was super strong and reliable. It had a really low first gear, great off-road, but that first gear wasn't any good on the road. So in essence, I had a 3-speed. You'd have to slip the clutch to let it out of that second gear on the pavement. And then fourth was only 1-to-1. There was no overdrive. So you're revving the truck way up when you're going down the highway. I've since replaced that with a ZF5 manual transmission, 5-speed, out of a later Ford truck. Axle line swapped that in, and I love it. First gear's not quite as low, but that's good because now I can use it on the pavement, and it has overdrive. It's completely changed the truck. I've driven that Ford all the way to Alaska. I've driven it to Cabo San Lucas, and I could have never done that with the old MV435. I'd still be out there and going down the road. So stick or automatic, find when you're dropping down something, if it gets real steep, you feel like the rear's gonna go over, you wanna stab the gas. So it's not very intuitive. You think, oh, I wanna stop, I wanna hit the brakes, but that'll kind of keep that motion going forward. So if you hit the gas, actually the front tires will kind of pull you, and you might hit the ground partially, but you'll still be on all 4 tires. Similarly, automatics aren't all created equal either. I've got to confess, the 42 RLE 4-speed in my Jeep, not my favorite. I feel like it sucks a lot of power. These were originally designed for a minivan. Overdrive is super tall. It's 0.69 to 1. So it doesn't really have the chops to pull it in overdrive going down the road on anything other than a flat surface. But then you drop back down into 1-to-1 and the RPMs go way up. So if I was gonna get an LJ again, I would look for one with a manual transmission. I might ask Roche what he did with his old AX15 and try and swap it into this thing. I'd love to have a manual in this Jeep. I think it would make it a lot more fun to drive. Now that being said, if I was going to buy a new Wrangler, I would get the 8-speed automatic. I think they are great. They have a much lower first gear than this, so they crawl pretty well. And with those 8 gears, you have 2 overdrives, and they're all real close together, so you're always in the power band. Even with the 3.6 liter Pentastar, that's kind of the base engine offering, I still think that a modern JL goes down the road great. And you add a Hemi or a diesel, and they're even better. One thing I like about manual trannies is when you park it, you can leave it in gear. But your most of the vehicles I own, unfortunately, do not have functioning emergency brakes. And with an automatic, you're just kind of up against the parking pole if you park on a hill. It's nice to have a functioning emergency brake, parking brake. The manual with it in gear, when you turn it off, I feel like that's much more robust. And you'll notice here, I've had to use a lot more throttle input. I got bound up there. Didn't have any issues in the YJ going through there. And in my Jeep, really had to gun it. It was bound up and then it lurched forward. So I didn't love that. One thing I hear people say about low geared transfer cases is that, oh, it's too low. I can't use it in the sand. I can't use it in the mud. It's going to be too low. But you just shift. Hopefully you learned a thing or two today. Which one do you prefer? Automatic transmissions or manual transmissions? You know which one I like better, but I want you to comment below and let me know your thoughts. And don't forget to crawl on over to that subscribe button and subscribe to the Driving Line channel.
Thanks for watching Driving Line. If you guys like this video, consider subscribing to our channel so you'll never miss any of the content we create here. Whether you're into trucks, Jeeps, imports, domestic vehicles, or anything in between, we are here to fuel your passion. So hit that subscribe button and we'll see you guys next time.